Welcome to Keith Knight, Don't Tread on Anyone in the Libertarian Institute. Today I am honored to be joined by Dr. Matthew Raphael Johnson. He is a scholar of Russian Orthodox history and philosophy. Dr. Johnson, where is the best place to find your collection of intellectual contributions?
Keith, I appreciate you having me on. I had not heard of you before, but now I'm going to be spreading the word about you. There's two places. My own website, which I kind of update when I feel like it, is rusjournal.org, rusjournal.org. And most of the time, though, you could follow me at Radio Albion, which is located in Great Britain. My two broadcasts, my main one, Orthodox Nationalist, was done on Wednesday for an hour, and the half-hour one on international politics is done on Thursday with Sennen. And then a lot of my essays are there, links to my books there, and importantly, my Patreon page is there. And even more importantly, a place where you could donate to me, because I am a full-time scholar and writer and activist and troublemaker that's been kicked out of universities and has no institution backing me. It's no churches, there's no governments, there's no. I wish the Russians would finance me. If they had any brains, they would. But hey, look, as soon as that check comes in from the FSB, you'll know. You'll be well taken care of. Don't worry about it.
Excellent. Today I wanted to have you on to first talk about 17 general truths you have discovered in your time researching. Before we get into those 17, how can one differentiate between truth and falsehood?
Well, I was a Platonist before I became a Christian. And the means to truth is to remove self-interest and any kind of heteronomous force from your thought process. I don't think truth is that difficult to find. It's just most people don't want to find it. If you come across something that seems to immediately merge with your own self-interest, whether it be your place in society or if it makes you money or whatever it is, be very careful. Truth is often extremely unpopular. Truth is often very difficult. No one really wants it. No one wants to hear it. No one likes honesty. But importantly, it's how you get there. It's reason is, and we're going to say this in the general truth, reason is very hard. No one really wants to follow a logical train of thought. You never know where it's going to go. And people are easily sidetracked with self-interest. My family won't like this. My boss won't like this. I'm going to be unpopular. I'm going to be kicked out of the country club. These are all important factors that if they're not there and you're rational, you're not, you have the education, coming to the truth of the matter in the world is not that difficult.
Starting with the first truth, I'm going to say it the way you said it in one of your previous recordings. If you could please give me an explanation of how you know this to be true or examples of where we see this in the real world. Starting off. Almost all historical knowledge the average educated American has is sheer fantasy. How do you know that's true?
Well, this comes from 30 years of experience. This is all I do. I've debated everybody, usually in writing, everything from social media. You go on the documentaries on the History Channel, make me cringe. I can't watch them anymore. They're based on wild assumptions. True historical knowledge isn't easy. It has to be specialized. It has to be years of focused study. There's mountains of material to go through to the point where for most people, it's simply too much, and I don't blame them. It's a huge amount of work. And once you get to it, you realize that nothing, I'm talking about your average middle class educated guy, although that is changing, I have to admit. The slogans that they spout from the History Channel, themselves not even coming from historians or anyone decent, anyone honest, fits a narrative. If it doesn't fit liberalism, it isn't true. This, for example, the real reason that Hitler invaded the Soviet Union, the fact that Hitler didn't even have a heavy tank at the time, that he didn't have a long-range bomber. He knew he was going to lose. The Soviets were going to invade Central Europe. There was no question about it. These kind of things. I could go on and on. Every aspect is false, and it comes from, again, self-interest. Historical knowledge is based on the action movie fantasy. The good guys and bad guys, black hats and white hats, very simplistic. Nazis versus a freedom-loving world, including Stalin, and that's where it comes from. And the main issue to see is that disagreement is costly. When you disagree with the narrative, and it costs a lot socially, very few people are going to disagree. They're going to do what they're told.
Truth number 2. Truth is almost never a concern for people when it comes to making general decisions, especially about who they are, their identity, their mission, what they're going to do, and what they're going to support. How is that the case as opposed to people are able to use their senses and see things objectively?
Just take any goal that someone has, any job that they have. Rarely do they simply rationalize something out or make a pro-con list or anything else. You never have a blank slate. You're always heavily influenced. And who's influencing you? Where's this all coming from? Self-identity is largely created by media and music. To actually be your own person is almost impossible. You're going to be perceived as a lunatic. And Nietzsche talked about this all the time. But beyond that, truth as such is something that most people don't think exists, or if it exists, it's solely in their own interests. If it's not in their interest, then it must not be true. If powerful people don't think it, it must not be true. And now I have to say that since the last election and the COVID stuff, that is changing. I'm starting to get, no one's invited me to country clubs or anything, but I used to be perceived as a lunatic, no matter how knowledgeable I might be. But now I'm perceived as a harmless eccentric. So things are improving in that department. But people now have no faith in institutions, which is fine by me. It's like the Soviet Union in the 70s. The faith in the institutions is now gone, ever since maybe 2016. And faith in the media is largely gone. So I want to be proven wrong in this respect. But when people come to a decision, whether it be political or otherwise, I don't think truth matters. What matters is their own self-interest, their sense of themselves, what's popular, what's fashionable, what will my boss like, what will the girls like, and what will cause me the least amount of trouble in society.
Truth number 3, freedom is a meaningless abstraction.
There is no such thing as abstract freedom. It's always freedom to do something. There's a big difference between a rational plan of action and passion. The drive to do something, the drive to get me. Consumer society is based on passion. The contradiction now is you have a system that justifies itself through reason, both liberal democracy and capitalism, that people can rationally plan out their life and their budget and everything else. But the system survives on impulse buying, on people buying into high levels of debt. They need the passions. That's how commercials are structured. Anything to manipulate people into buying and buying and buying and buying. So the system rationalizes itself as based on reason, but in fact, it can only survive with passion and tight control and a manipulative narrative. Now, you'll see, that'll be more explicit, I think, in the next couple of truths, exactly what I mean there.
Number 4, humans are not rational.
Reason is hard. Reason is difficult. I don't think people realize how difficult it is, how many friends you're going to lose, how hard it is to map something out, and the knowledge you have to come to any conclusion. People do what is easy. People do what's in their interest. No one likes honesty. No one likes an honest man. Do I look fat in this dress? Yeah, you do. No one likes this. Truth in any matter is often extremely unpopular. And I've lived this way for 30 years, knowing things that will get me murdered in certain circles. But the very fact that it gets me murdered suggests maybe I'm onto something.
Number 5, to be human, you have to be both rational and free.
Well, otherwise, you're a lump of flesh. This is Aristotle's definition. This is the essence of what it is to be a human being. Freedom and reason are two sides of the same coin. In order to be free, you have to be able to rationalize or cognize a situation, means to ends, and have goals, all of which can be rationally laid out. That's hard. That's what, and of course, it requires a reason. Reason and freedom are one and the same. If you're not free, then what's the point of reason? You can't be free and not rational. You'd be an animal. Being rational and not free just doesn't make any sense. So someone who can't lay out a problem rationally without any concern for any heteronomous drive, that's extremely rare, and it's very hard. It's going to get you in a lot of trouble.
Number 6, free will is the result of struggle and study.
Well, which is easier? Following a rational path or doing what your passions and desires prompt you to do? The problem is passions are immediate. These drives that we have, greed or whatever, this is immediate. And you can picture in your head that, if you're a woman that you want, you can picture what it's like to be with her, or the house that you want. It's a fantasy that you have. Reason really can't compete with that. Reason is hard. Reason takes many steps, and besides that, you have to be able to know what you want, and you have to have the knowledge and the background to do it. I have something out on the assumptions the founding fathers had in writing the Constitution, and these are the sort of people that they wrote the Constitution for, not the mass society types. They're talking about an aristocratic, well-educated group of people who were free in the sense that they owned enough land and were able to defend themselves so that no one can pressure them. They could come, that was Jefferson's definition, that they could come to a rational conclusion about anything without having to worry about being fired or being murdered. That was a definition of freedom. Well, how many people can that identify today? So that's what it comes down to. That's the very definition of what it is to be a man. And both of those things are very difficult. Freedom, usually, existentialists say this all the time, freedom is scary. Because freedom means that things that happen are your fault. Something goes wrong. I mean, who likes to take responsibility for that? They go running, they blame others. The false self, or Das Man for Heidegger, claiming that it's really not me. I'm just, this is just blaming other people. This is what you see everywhere. People who can't admit they're wrong. People can't admit they don't know something. It's pride and ego take precedence over anything else. And these are not aspects of freedom. They're aspects of this drive to dominate others.
Number 7, the individual is a myth.
Yeah, the individual is one of these things that you can't defend while remaining an individual. If you defend individualism, you then have to use arguments, language, take advantage of all kinds of cultural norms to make an argument that you don't need those things. Now, there's a difference between an individual and a person. The individual is an ego. The person is a well-rounded product of a community. Those are two very different things. There's no such thing as an individual because nothing we do is done by ourselves. We're born helpless, not free. We are raised in a certain way. The purpose of child rearing is to manifest reason over the passionate drives, which is very difficult to do. And not just freedom to do anything, freedom to do something that itself is rational and contribute. And as we said before, freedom is a struggle. It's this constant battle against the passions and these drives. But whenever you do, you're doing it with others. You're doing it in a society. There's no aspect of your person, whether it be your language, the way you think, the way you the clothes you wear, everything. You're totally dependent on how many different people just to live in a house, just to drive a car. There's millions of people that you're dependent on for that. So calling yourself an independent individual is laughable. Well, you don't deliver your own mail. You can't defend yourself against a gang of marauders. No, the individual is a myth. The individual is a way to alienate and divide a population. And even the concept of individualism is such that, if you justify individual desires and self-interest, well, Warren Buffett's desires are a hell of a lot more important than mine. If he somehow crushes me, I'm in no position to complain. because I subscribe to the idea that, our individual self-interest is all that we have. If that's true, I cannot complain when one of these people crushes me. These certain individuals just mean more than others, and that means more actually refers to the fact they have money and media access and power. Individualism is really convenient for those who already have power over you.
My colleague at the Libertarian Institute, Sheldon Richmond, says, even if you're playing a game of solitaire, doing something by yourself, it's not really by yourself. You didn't invent cards. You didn't invent the ink that's on the cards. You didn't invent the electricity or the house. You're only alive because other people made food that you trade with. So in his book, What Social Animals Owe to Each Other, he says, there's no such thing as no cooperation. What we have are ways to voluntarily cooperate and ways to coercively cooperate or engage in exchanges. Do you think voluntarism and violence are two important distinctions to make?
Yeah, there's a difference between a collective and a community. You can't, when Stalin collectivized agriculture, he already had to break up natural families and communities. The war did that. The Civil War did that. Collectivization is forcibly bringing people together under some state auspices. Cooperation, community, is something that's always existed. The extended family, ethnic cooperation under pressure, people in a religious unit, this do generations upon generations. It's normal in that case. It's not coerced, it's who you are. That's what forms the individual person, not the ego. So those people talk about individualism versus collectivization or collectivism. Now, collective is already alienated. Collective is already a group of people who really don't have much in common, forcing them together. That's what a collective is. A community is a naturally occurring group that's been cooperating for a long time and using reason, humility, and virtues to come to a rational end. All of these things have to be in place. I'm telling you, it was for the ancients, it was second nature. But for us, it seems like a fantasy.
Number 9, very few people are capable of love. How do you know that that's true?
There's a whole bunch of reasons for that. When I was younger, I thought that every mother automatically loved their kids. I found out, at numerous levels, not just personal, but many other levels. I've seen that not be the case. Parental abandonment and abuse is common. Love is difficult in a society that's focused on ego and wish fulfillment, because love is total mutual vulnerability. You're giving someone the ability to destroy you if they want. You're placing your whole person at the doorstep of someone else. No one's willing to do that. No one's willing to take that risk. Everything is conditional. Everything is based on a contract. But what's happened is the family has fallen apart. Is parents don't feel any obligation to their kids, or if they do, it's just so other people won't consider them abusers. In the social services industry, I know too many people in that field that will tell you perfectly normal middle-class people who totally abandon their kids, who let the TV raise them, who don't care what's going on. They'll say it in public, but they're so wrapped up in their world and their careers and everything else, they just, they're just forgotten. The problem there is that they're raised by the television. They're raised by the regime. That's something I had to find out on a personal level. And once I found it on a personal level, the narcissists, the mentally ill, the borderline, they're incapable of love. The sociopath is incapable of love. All they know is self-interest and grabbing people, using them for their own purposes. But that's becoming institutionalized. Love is really hard. Love is saying that I'm giving you the power to crush me if you want. We're becoming one person. Destroying a family is far worse than destroying an individual. Families are the units of society, not the individual. So learning that many people, if not most people, are not incapable of this kind of giving, allowing someone to have that much power over them, it was shocking. And really only in my 40s, I would say, did I come to that conclusion. And it really sucks.
How can one determine whether or not they're in love or just experiencing an erroneous passion?
Well, time usually tells that. Self-sacrifice tells that. The infatuation doesn't last very long. What they're willing to do for you. It's basically service. And even service, not expecting anything in return. Self-sacrifice, not because you're trying to be a martyr, but and if you wish their well-being so much that you don't care if they give you anything back. Self-sacrifice without any interest in reciprocation. Not reciprocating is wrong, but from the point of view of the person doing it, this is what love is. And really, they don't care. You start introducing conditions, it's not love. You're now an employee with a contract that you have to follow. This is something I've known both in positive and the negative sense. And saying I love you is easy, but sacrificing, bringing that to life, putting their interests ahead of your own, that's very, very hard. I've experienced, thank God, both sides of that coin.
Number 11, very few people are capable of sustained thought. How can I tell whether or not I'm capable of sustained thought?
Well, if you are, alienated, isolated person, there's a chance of the reason for that. Sustained thought is it's exhausting. Going through a problem, any say a historical study, requires a massive amount of reading, but not just reading, but a massive amount of analysis, writing things out, challenging hypotheses, and all this without caring what the conclusion might be. You can't start off with the conclusion already in your head. And going through this while avoiding fallacies, both formal and informal, going through this without worrying about what people think, going with any of those outside concerns. I'll get fired if I write this. Well, then you're not free, and you're not coming to any kind of. It's not real thought. It's just self-interest. Sustained thought without the invasion of passions and drives is, even for the best of us, almost impossible. Not because humans were designed for that. At least the aristocratic part of humanity was designed for that. But self-discipline, the ability to think a problem through without the passions of self-interest or greed or anything else. If you're black and you're going through a problem, my brothers are going to hate me if I say. That's not free. That's not sustained thinking. That then becomes special pleading. There's a million examples you could use for this. It's hard. It's unpopular, and you'll be considered a lunatic if you engage it. So this is one of the more difficult ones. That people are used to hearing everything put out to them in soundbite, in bumper sticker slogans and one-liners. Verbal debates are usually won by who has the funniest zingers. Verbal debates are difficult because I love them in writing. Verbally, someone makes a point and you can't think. You have to immediately respond. Well, I don't like that at all. I want to think it. I want to reflect on it. I want to read about it. That's why written debates make a hell of a lot more sense. Verbal debates end up being one-liners. And I'm capable of that. But that's not really something that's going to educate anybody. So, zingers, one-liners, Saturday Night Live skits, I can do that, but you're not going to convert anybody that way. Verbal debates are for entertainment. Written debates are another matter.
Number 12, people can rationalize anything.
I think this is almost people, we know this. This isn't something I think anyone needs to hear. I think people know that. There's a difference between reason and rationalization. Reason is when you lay out in your mind objectively that an end that you're pursuing, a goal that you're pursuing, is worthwhile. Rationalization is the opposite. You know that what you're doing is wrong, but you're pretty sure you can convince everyone it's okay later. Asking forgiveness rather than permission. And people do it, and people do it without thinking about it. People do it, and I've seen this in my own life. I see it everywhere. People commit heinous acts to you as a person, and then say, well, I was drunk, or you were mean to me once, or you were mean too once. They could rationalize anything, which means that I think the corollary to that is that cognitive dissonance is now becoming a chronic illness. If you're not a sociopath, cognitive dissonance is really hard to live with. I don't think there's a university professor or journalist alive that actually believes the crap that they're told to say, which means that in a rational world, I'd be a tenured professor right now. But that means I would have to socialize with these people They have to vote on me after 6 years. Well, am I supposed to be quiet in that 6-year time? I would have to change who I am to make that happen. That's the very opposite of freedom. That's the very opposite of reason. This is exactly what people like Jefferson said is no republic can be based on that. And now it's institutionalized and considered the very definition of freedom.
Number 13, today in universities, serious historical criticism is almost non-existent.
I've been a professor at 4 universities in my life. It's really what I'm meant to do. I was wildly popular with students. I can't stress that enough. Students dropping out of other classes to come to mine. I was tough but fair and funny, and I brought people into the history department. When someone visited the school to see if they want to go there, they came to my class. I was part of the freshman orientation because everyone liked the way I was. I forgot shoes one morning. I went to teach at Mount St. Mary's. I'm from the Jersey Shore. I got out of the car, no shoes. Didn't care. But at the same time, deadly accurate, and I just didn't care whether someone was offended or not, and everyone appreciated that. Whether it be race or something else, black students, especially black females, for some reason, were my biggest fan. And I think part of the reason is I shot from the hip. I didn't care what they thought, and that's appreciated by a lot of people. And to be able to think on your feet and to be able to go through a subject rationally in front of students who don't know anything about reason yet, that makes you popular. Unfortunately, it didn't make me popular with other professors. I had plenty of friends, but when these people found out that I was the editor of the Barnes Review, they weren't my friends anymore. And there's all kinds of threats. If you don't leave, we're going to say that you did some sexual thing, whatever. And they never did, but this is always a threat. This is always in the back of their minds. If someone has tenure, getting rid of them is easy. Just hire a member of the Lesbian Student Association to say he touched me. That's all you got to do. And she doesn't have to even reveal her name. It's really easy to get rid of one of these guys, and every professor in university is well aware of that. It's the easiest job in the world. There's so many benefits, but you have to toe the line in a way that I don't know how any of these guys can do it. I don't think the white male professors truly believe what they're saying. I don't know if you know this. I did it's 2014. I did a informal study. If you don't mind me taking a few minutes, it was this is right after the government was overthrown in Ukraine, which is a big deal for me. I wanted to call, there's 20 professors, universities specializing in Eastern Europe, equally men and women, young and old. So 4 groups total. And my question was simply, what is your opinion of the events in Kiev over the last few months? And I knew what they were going to say, unfortunately. And every single one of them said the same thing. And then my follow-up question was going to be, they all had the same liberal explanation. And the follow-up question is it a coincidence that every institution of power, from the UN to everyone else in the academy, New York Times, Washington Post, the IMF, every single one of these institutions happens to agree with that point of view? Is that just coincidental?
And Victoria Nuland and Gideon Rose at Foreign Affairs. Gideon Rose gets on Stephen Colbert's show and goes, well, what's going on is Ukraine is Putin's girlfriend, and we're trying to steal his girlfriend. Like, oh my gosh, how do you still think you're the resistance when people in all these major institutions still agree with you? Revolution of dignity, I think they ended up calling it. Just an unbelievable scam. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I want to let people know this really is like the Council on Foreign Relations and your neighbor with a BLM sign. We're on the same page. What's going on there?
Yeah, talk about cognitive dissonance. And so for all 4 groups, I pretty much had an idea what would happen. Younger females, I don't think knew that there was a big problem here. I think they actually believed this. They tended to be more shrill. Older females tended to be, like professors in their 60s, tended to be more motherly. Like, oh, you poor soul. I'm going to, younger males were less shrill, and they were the ones who were, hung up on me. And I said I was a grad student. I'm doing a research paper. Can I please have your opinion? It was after the semester was over. And the only group of people were older males. They kind of knew it was nonsense. But what are they going to do? They're heading to retirement. They're making $100,000 a year for doing very little. They didn't say that, but, they kind of knew that this was just a slogan. It's not a coincidence that they were in agreement with the CIA. And that's pretty much what I figured. I have a paper out on the topic. The uniformity, the same slogans, the same buzzwords, and with these 20 people, not one of them gave me any usable knowledge that I couldn't have gotten from the Washington Post. And but they don't have to. It's a very easy job. They're expected to spout the slogans. Any of us can teach a university class today, whether you're specialized in the subject or not. It's getting to the point where the curriculum is just laid out from beginning to end. And this is what a professor is. So trying to deal with truth in a university, it's one of the most painful aspects of my life personally, where although I was personally very popular, politically, even in grad school, politically I was not. And not because I thought I was wrong, but they thought they'd get in trouble by associating with me. It wasn't a matter of truth. It was a matter of their career and who's going to come down on them. The universities are little collectivized gulags. Students have if you use a university network, they're watching your website while you're web browsing. Many websites, including my own, are blocked. I can't forget the guy from what was in Charlottesville with me, who was at the University of Nebraska, where I came out of, and was driven off campus, a biologist, driven off campus. So they considered him a threat. The basketball team came out, this is a major university, with T-shirts condemning him. This one guy, Dan Klee was his name. I wrote him, I wrote the student association. That's how it is there. The regime has different groups that they can mobilize to get rid of anybody and intimidate them. No one's going to come to their defense. This poor guy was hounded from campus, and he did nothing more than show up to Charlottesville. So the universities are places. People like my stuff because they say I'm what they should have gotten in the university. It's university education without the stupidity, without the pressure. And I think that's why I didn't think my radio show, my stuff would work, because of how I am. Just lectures and nothing else. And I realized I was wrong. And this is what people are worrying about.
Do you have any theory as to how this power was sort of consolidated? How we go from, there not being progressivism everywhere to progressivism being dominant at Harvard, Yale, Princeton, the entire Ivy League, the corporate press, the mainstream media, and the Democratic Party, and most Republicans as well are doing this. Do you have any idea on how this power was accumulated and what we could learn from it?
Well, there's an institutional force. I usually don't use progressive. I always use liberal. I use left liberal. Now I just use regime. When I use the word regime, by the way, it's a technical term, capital R. It refers to the confluence of public and private power centers working together, really mixing the two really aren't even differentiated anymore. Private and public sources of power are pretty much one and the same. It's a revolving door, finance and defense. It's all the same people, and that they have power in society. They are society. Today, of course, it's BlackRock, the investment firm that controls most of the stock market. Most of the world's former central bankers are on their board, and vice versa. I wrote a paper on them. I think a dozen major central banks have someone on their board. About half of the major people in Biden's, I use quotes because there's no Biden's cabinet are connected to BlackRock. It's not an oligarchy, it's now a monopoly. Lawrence Fink and a whole bunch of others. It's really depressing. And of course, they say, BlackRock says, we are not giving you credit or any kind of investment assistance unless you're a leftist. They come right out and say that. Now, corporate America was leftist to begin with. Now it's on paper. You can't get a loan. You can't get credit. You can't even be a blue chip company without BlackRock's assistance. The power is so overwhelming. And that came directly out of COVID. And I didn't really know about BlackRock until COVID hit. And the massive concentration of wealth in a handful of people that was increased beyond belief just in that year and a half.
So what happens? There's a crisis that is sort of putting power up for grabs, and whichever group capitalizes on that power grab most ends up getting the positions in the universities and the press. Is that how it goes?
To a great extent. You have to have the Rockefeller Foundation, Ford Foundation, were overwhelmingly leftist, going way back, and they finance research. That's the way you have to go for a grant. The leftist movement had been in positions of power for a very long time. So when it comes to the university, this is where the grant money came from. And it's very easy to mobilize students on the basis of, ethnic identity to make sure that you don't do anything. I've been the victim of this. It's a miracle I survived. I got my Ph.D., battling every single day. And I became a pretty tough guy because of it. I was respected, but, and I was very likable, which is, by the way, how I got through. He's a nut, but he's a nice guy. And he's good. So it comes down to the concentration of money, comes down to institutions who are willing to give themselves to do this. And, a crisis, something like World War II, where right-wingers were kicked out of the university because they were considered pro-Hitler. And communists were able to take over. The civil rights movement was one of the worst, where anyone considered non-liberal was removed as a threat to black students, whatever the argument was. But there are several books on the topic about how this was done, and how it was simply taken over using foundation money, and that's Ford, Rockefeller, there's a million of them, MacArthur. If you want research finance, you have to go to them, and of course, if you go to corporate America, their research grants are all the same. Every major corporate grant-making agency, both big corporations have one, a nonprofit, or on the left of the political spectrum. The most that they'll do, I've heard of a couple given to the Heritage Foundation. I've heard of that a few times. I've been through them all 1,000 times. I have a whole list of who's giving to Black Lives Matter. And it is pretty much everyone, the entire blue chip stock. I can't think of a company that's not donating to it. They won't pay someone's mortgage off, but they'll give money to these people. And they'll turn around and burn the place down. And they'll still give money to them. This is something that people have to understand. This is what corporate America is. It is a revolutionary leftist movement. And it's not a matter of state power, because they're involved in state power. State bureaucrats sit on their board. Well, they have government jobs, and they go round and round. There is no difference between state and corporate power anymore.
Yeah, James Burnham called it managerialism.
That's right.
Curtis Yarvin calls it the cathedral. Like how they're all synoptic on the same page, even though there's no one power center. It's not like, well, if we arrested Joe Biden, then these people would be finished. It's like, no, there's no final boss for you to face. So yeah, that decentralization point I think is vital.
I think I love that you mentioned James Burnham. I read him in grad school, and it made a lot of sense out of it. People want to personify power. If you have an enemy, you want to be able to caricature them. Like Hitler or Rasputin or the King of England. Whether they actually had the power or not doesn't matter. It symbolized something more. When you have this very decentralized, secretive, and yet very real power. I mean, how many people know who Lawrence Fink is? He controls BlackRock. He controls most of the stock market. Very few people know who he is. It's without a central institution, it's really hard to personify power. Without personifying power, it's hard to mobilize people against it. They're not quite sure what they're fighting. It's difficult. These people aren't stupid, and they know psychology.
So so someone in power, let's take Fink or Kissinger or David Rockefeller, do they do it by building up credibility and alliances, or how does I mean Kissinger is like, getting bullied in Germany, comes over as a poor immigrant, and now he's like calling the shots for tons of presidents going to China, merging the U.S. and China. Like, how do these people get so much power and influence?
Well, a lot of these people were born into it. Kissinger, Michael Collins Piper always used to say that Kissinger personally doesn't have power, but he's associated with people who do, and he knows how to work them. And but in his own right, he doesn't. But he knows how to attach himself and give. The PR media control is absolutely essential to this. You only have a handful of media centers. When you already have the financial centralization, it's really not that hard. Think of a whole group. Lawrence Summers is one of my favorite targets. Used to be the president of Harvard. Lawrence Summers was involved with the destruction of the Russian economy in the 1990s, and also involved in the crisis of 2008 in America. So the man has been, in some sense, involved in the meltdown of two countries' economy. So, as president of Harvard, and he was getting into some kind of trouble. Harvard was sued. Their economics department got into a lot of trouble for this. And he came out in public and he said, girls aren't very good at math. And that's all the press wanted to talk about. All of a sudden, the lawsuit against the economics department went away. It was a bumper sticker slogan. Oh my God, I can't believe a sexist is at Harvard. Of course, he doesn't believe that. It's true, but he can't believe that. And he says it outright, and that's all anyone cared about. The Harvard press, the national press, the sexist Lawrence Summers, and then all the coverage of the destruction of that department. The Institute for Transition Economies was shut down by the State Department. The Justice Department. They had to pay a fortune for their fraudulent work in Russia. That was all forgotten, and all of these people still are, Andre Schleifer, are all still considered respectable economists despite their destructive history. And all they have to do is throw a smoke screen there and make believe issue, and that's it. They're fine. This is what goes into everything we've been saying. People aren't rational. People aren't capable of drawn out cognition, because this is how easy it is to get people to forget, to get people interested in these made up ridiculous movements. That's all you have to do. And when Summers did that, it changed things. The fact that, when the bailouts after 2008, which bottomed out the economy, the bailouts were announced, you have banks who, by the way, have been foreclosing on homes. Now, because of their incredible irresponsibility, are being bailed out by the taxpayer. In other words, the same people who they foreclosed on now have to pay for their restructuring. And they're doing it again. And nothing was done. People didn't even know what I was talking about. In the newspapers, they use very technical language. Quantitative easing, they would always describe it in a way that the layman couldn't understand. And so you had this ridiculous wealth transfer, pension funds going to the regime. White homelessness is a big deal in America. Behind any Walmart in Chambersburg, PA, is loaded with vans and everything. And the bottoming out of the economy. This is what I mean. It's frightening. And the worst part is that people aren't aware of it. We've been in a depression for years that no one's noticed because of tight media control. And this is a struggle right now, and it's something I think that nationalists and libertarians may be able to get behind each other on.
Number 14. There are people out there who have never suffered.
Well, this is I've come across these people. There are people who are born into such privilege that they really never have had a problem. I know a few of them. Had a few students who were. They tend to make up problems. I lost my purse. Someone mugged me. I was assaulted. That's happened so many times. People, attractive women getting jobs that they have no right to have. I've seen it done 1,000 times. There's a million examples of this. There's a privileged caste of the population that really doesn't suffer. They don't know what suffering is, and it creates a persona that's very frivolous, that's very arrogant, that's very entitled, and they think the tiniest little thing. Here you got families losing their homes, losing their children, and these people think that just get a job. If they're depressed, just feel better. It's easy to say when you've never really suffered. I've seen this with too many people, and it's a handful, but I've seen it happen. These people sail through life. A female or a non-white American university does what he pleases, and they don't have to worry about what I had to worry about. So this is a big problem. Yeah, there are people who have never suffered, don't know what suffering is, and who think that breaking a nail is suffering.
15. Insanity, that is to say, to be a psychopath, is far more common than people realize.
I want to revise that to mean not just psychopathy, sociopathy, but also, cluster B, narcissism, and especially histrionics, and I can't think of the third one, borderline. The numbers seem to be right now 1 in 6. 1 in 6 people is severely mentally ill. The problem is when you have a society that rewards I'm talking really about sociopathy. Someone who is superficially charming, but has absolutely no moral fiber. They can lie and not feel anything. That's why they can pass a lie detector test. Nothing in their physiology will change if they tell a lie. Truth, falsehood, good and evil are identical to them. They don't hesitate when pursuing their self-interest. In postmodern capitalism, they have a tremendous advantage over people who are going to hesitate because we have morals. We have to go through what might happen if we do something. The man who takes care of his labor force will lose to the man who doesn't care because it's going to cost him more money. To use a simple example. Coming across these people in positions of power, it's almost a requirement. You can't be affected by cognitive dissonance and be in a position of power. So this is, you're seeing it everywhere. It's almost a requirement. People who don't have no moral, it's not that they know what morals are, they just don't care, and they don't feel any guilt or any remorse. So you have the sociopath who has no hesitation to commit evil acts. He has no principles, and it doesn't bother him, and yet he is still superficially charming. That's a danger, and that's what this society promotes, and that's who gets rewarded. This is why people in power tend to be completely amoral.
Well, yeah, the classic example of, someone who's a real psycho could say 2 + 2 = 5 with a straight face. Now, we had in the same day, this had to have been planned because it was just so bizarre. Joe Biden's Twitter account, Nancy Pelosi in person, and Jen Psaki all said $3.5 trillion will cost $0. That was their explanation of the first Build Back Better piece of legislation. They all said 0, and both of them with their hands went just like this, as though it was all choreographed. The fact that they're able to just brazenly lie in their justification, people can rationalize almost anything, we have ways of getting the money, so it's going to be paid for, so it won't cost anything. That's not what it means to cost. So the fact that they have explicitly, mathematically lied it just shows the amount of confidence that they have in their inability to even care. Like, as they say that, you'd think they'd stop and apologize and cry and feel bad, but they really don't.
Think how difficult it would be for a normal person to be in that position.
Yeah.
That you have to lie. You have to support people who are evil. You have to protect child molesters, whatever. That's going to affect you. It's going to hurt you. You won't be able to last. I don't care how good the money is. That means those in those positions can't care. Cognitive dissonance, holding two opposed positions at the same time because you have to, that's hard. I've been forced to do that, but it's extremely difficult. No job is worth that. it tortures you. If you have any interest in truth at all, it tortures you. Even in personal relationships. I love somebody, but they're destroying me. And that's extremely hard to have these two opposite things. A sociopath, but the cluster B in general, doesn't have this problem. A sociopath doesn't care because it doesn't matter. You could hold anything. And that's why they do so well. They don't hesitate in their decision making. They always have a story. They always have a rationalization. And with money and power already, these are exactly the people who do just that. And it won't make any difference. And they'll destroy anybody who disagrees, no matter how intelligent or useful they are. And they don't worry about that. A normal person, someone like us, and that we couldn't last 5 minutes. They can give me $10 million and I couldn't do it.
Number 17. Most arguments come down to disagreements over the meaning of terms.
This is just a matter of personal experience. I can't think of it. I debate every day in one form or another, usually informally. I debate every day, and it's extremely rare that something like equivocation doesn't come up, using the same word in two different senses. The meaning of terms is extremely important. Someone calls you a white supremacist, you need to say, excuse me, that word is used so often, it has no functional definition. Can you please explain to me what you mean? Then it all falls away. It goes off the rails immediately, partially because they don't know, and partially because they know that you got them. And they try to explain it. You say, no, I do not believe this. I do not accept that. I don't believe that genetics is destiny. So, use a different word. But that's the slogan that they use. Words are cudgels. They're hammers to use against people, to hurt them. That's what debate is. Name calling. Really dehumanizing things, redneck or incel for certain guys. These are dehumanizing. These are meant to make it okay to hurt them. And make it okay to destroy them. And you have to, redneck is one of the worst because really these people aren't human to them. The guy in a trailer with the Trump sign, he gets shot. No one's going to investigate that murder. That's what the name calling is. So words are extremely important. Words are defined and redefined and redefined over a very, very short period of time because that substitutes for actual knowledge. Either words or cliches, a slogan. Using words without really their knowledge of them is common, and to use them as weapons is something else. The coverage of the Capitol riot, still, I have trouble reading it. It's so bad. It's so manipulative. These leftists, BLM has been burning down cities and killing cops. And yet the policeman who was killed at the Capitol, they had this massive, cops were condemned everywhere else, but with that situation, people were kneeling in front of them. On the cover of, I think it was cover of Newsweek. All of a sudden, being a cop is good again. But of course, they went to another city, being a cop is bad again. The only people who can do this are sociopaths. A normal person couldn't do this. I don't care how much money you give me. I couldn't act like that. It isn't relativism. These people really do have an agenda. A lot of that agenda they can't tell anybody. But this is so anyway, getting back to words, using these words, images, slogans, these are substitutes for knowledge. And when you ask them what they mean, usually it ends. But then when you tear it apart, you end up winning. Someone calls you a white supremacist. Excuse me, what do you think that means? I'm called that every day. Fascism, one of my favorites. I actually know what it means. I've read it until it was coming out my pores. They haven't. Please explain to me what you mean. And usually they become very dismissive on a personal level. And then when they try to define it, they have no idea what they're talking about, and it can be funny. But
it can be funny. Ibram X. Kendi, who's one of the biggest people in the BLM anti-white supremacy movement, he was asked at the Aspen Institute. He goes, I might have missed it earlier. What is your definition of racism? He goes, yeah. So what I mean is racist people engaged in racist institutions that promote racist policies. That's his definition of racism, using the word 3 times in the definition without giving any additional information. This is like their top guy. And you should see the amount of the criteria they have for evidence of racism, of course, is always some ridiculous disparity, which could always be responded with, well, men are 95% of deaths by the police, yet only 50% of the population. Is that sexism? They're more imprisoned. The NBA is mostly black. Is that racism? Math is mostly Asian. Is that racism against whites? So of course, that's why I loved that last one so much, because I run into it all the time. I want to just give my, I want to try, is fascism the merging of the state and I want to say that that's like the throwaway definition. I'm trying to think of Mussolini's fascist doctrine. I can't think of the definition. Can you give it to us?
Yeah, Mussolini's, what is fascism is very clear. The state is the only reality. This is why Hitler didn't like it. This is why Italy kind of understand at the time. The state is the only institution that matters. The state exists even before politics exists. The only way that an individual can become who he is, a nation can even exist, that an economy can function, is if there's a strong state that protects it both from internal and external enemy. And this state has to be singular and unified and based on the domination of a particular charismatic leader. I understand that when you're talking about a state in crisis, especially a small country. This I understand. But as a philosophical doctrine, it's extremely difficult to justify. I'm willing to say that a certain level of security is necessary for any institution to thrive. That's not what he's saying. He's saying that any entity, from the individual to a church, only comes into existence because of the state, and the state gives it permission to do that.
Everything within the state, nothing outside of it. Was that the line?
Yeah, and by state, see, people use state in different ways. In Germany, like Hegel used state to refer to not just the formal institutions of power. It almost was another word for constitution. It was the entire aspect of authority, legitimate or illegitimate. To be a state was to be legitimate. It's far more expansive than in Russian too, far more expansive than in English. But Mussolini used it to mean the state, the way we use the state. Police, courts, written documents, penal codes, and a leader and an army. This is what he meant. And you can kind of understand where that might come into. Again, the third world, it kind of makes sense when states are fighting external enemies. And I get where that doctrine might come from. It's a way to mobilize the economy, force people to work, get people, and in a limited way, I get it. But he's using it as a central philosophical doctrine that this is how history moves, this is how society functions.
You wrote a book, The Soviet Experiment. Can you explain how the Bolsheviks were able to seize power over such a large geographical area?
The great myth, and it's a myth that I have destroyed over and over again. It's like number one on our list. Most history is fantasy. Is that the Western world not only did nothing to fight the Bolsheviks, but actively supported them. The whites had tons of money, but no one would sell them weapons. No one would support them unless they immediately, assumed all Soviet debt, Russian debt, and let the British or the French come in and colonize economically. The Bolsheviks were willing to play ball. They had tremendous contacts in Western banking capitals, but more importantly, this was the ideological movement. Now, they didn't understand ideology so much, but it was they received the money that the whites didn't get. They, Karl Marx worked for the major media. For the New York Tribune, I think he wrote for. Trotsky wrote for a major daily in America. These were already establishmentarians. And I don't think most Americans knew what Bolshevism was at the time. But this was the group that they bet on, that they thought was going to save the Jews who were dying in pogroms and everything else. And that's where they went. The whites were considered, the worst kind of, we would call fascist, and demonized in the press. And without Western support, The Bolsheviks take over, and immediately food aid comes pouring in. The whites, on the other hand, are using weapons stolen from the Reds. The Reds didn't have nearly the manpower that the whites had, but they never ran out of ammunition. Kind of like ISIS, never runs out of ammunition. Non-military men running things, and yet they're winning. They were seen as the best bet to create a stable Russia, industrialized with free trade with the West, and importantly, making good on Soviet debts. Russian debts.
Anthony Sutton says that there was explicit exchanges between Jacob Schiff in America and German intelligence in hopes of taking Russia out of the war. Is there any truth to that?
Anthony Sutton is one of my major sources. He has a 3-volume work on the subject where he has internal documents showing that even during the Civil War, Western corporations were ready to build socialism with the Bolsheviks. The Bolsheviks had nothing. The engineers were long gone, either dead or gone by the time they took over. There was nothing. Henry Ford built the largest Ford plant in the world in the 30s in eastern Ukraine, in Kharkiv. All the Soviet automotive industry came from that. Everything from the railways to the oil, of course, the Standard Oil. The Rothschilds moved into the oil field. The Lena, the mining firms, all came from the West. They saw a massive opportunity to build that. They didn't care if Bolshevism was whatever they want. The Soviets knew that they couldn't build anything without Western capital. Stalin even worried about that Soviet independence is going to be harmed because we're so dependent on Western capital. Now, eventually, they were able to do this themselves. The first 15 years, my book really is more the first 20 years, I guess, 25 years. This was Western capital created the Soviet Union. GE created their electrical grid. Everything the Soviet Union became was, and this is during the Great Depression, everything the Soviet Union became is because of Western capital. Anthony Sutton was one of the few who laid this out with actual receipts. There's no question. But this continued right up until the 80s. Reagan even complained about it. I mean, high-tech computer equipment, weapons equipment. You got Soviet military taking classes at American universities. The only time you'll see sanctions on Russia is when someone like Putin's running it. All of a sudden, it's now a problem. China was slaughtering in the worst mass murder in history. They exploded their nuclear bomb in 1964, and the regime yawned. Iran is even thinking about nuclear power, and now that's the end of the world. It has to do with the ideology. The establishment has always had a soft spot for socialism, so long as the dollar is not excluded from it. The only time the West had a problem with the Soviet Union was when it grew too large. And they'd have a problem with any empire that grew too large. And there was a possibility of them not using the dollar anymore, of keeping American exports out. That was the only problem. The state was in favor of the Vietnam War. The regime was not, which is why you had massive funded anti-war movements. Today, you have far less rational wars over longer periods of time, no anti-war movement. You have the U.S. moving nuclear weapons into Central Europe, even Bulgaria and Romania right now. Where's this anti-nuke stuff? I remember the anti-nuke stuff in the 80s when I was a kid. All nowhere to be found. The U.S. pulled out of all the treaties. All of a sudden, the no-nuke stuff is gone. When a nationalist or at least non-liberal group takes over, the regime goes into high gear. We're going to destroy you. Communists can take over, no matter how vicious they might be. There'll be nothing done. There were never any sanctions on the USSR. Trade and the high tech, the most sensitive areas, was constant. The only time that there was any, I think there were some sanctions, which led to the Jackson-Vanik Amendment, which kept Jews from emigrating to the USSR. That was the only issue. That was the big problem with Soviet policy. If you read Woodrow Wilson and a few others at that time, the only time that Lenin was a problem if he was acting like a czar. There's such a bad reputation. Russians were these animals. Racism is okay if it's against Russians. There's half Asiatic nonsense. And even Hitler bought into that. It goes back to the Crimean War. But otherwise, they were the wave of the future. And the Western world rebuilt the USSR both in 1918 onward and rebuilt them again after 1945.
What is some must-know information about the First World War that many people either have never heard of or overlook?
The main culprit is Austria. No one wanted that war, except Britain. Britain had a problem. Britain is looking at two massive powers that alone could crush them, let alone together. And that was Germany and Russia. Britain couldn't compete. Those economies were growing so quickly, and their populations were exploding, and they had strong monarchies that were very popular. When the Russians discovered oil in what we call Azerbaijan today, they went bonkers. This is a superpower. Had World War I not happened, Russia would be the dominant force in the world with about 1 billion people. So what is what's the reaction? Where is the flashpoint that we can get these two fighting each other? They certainly couldn't fight them combined. And that flashpoint was the Balkans. If Germany gave Austria the green light to invade Serbia, they would do it. Now, Austria almost lost. Austria was shellacked in their invasion of Serbia. The only reason they did it is they got the green light from the Germans. That's what started the war. Austrian pride and arrogance was the main cause. Franz Ferdinand was pro-Slavic. He had no problem with greater freedoms for this. Shooting him didn't make any sense. A Slavic group shooting him was ridiculous. He was not opposed to it allowed others to take over. So more than anything else, that was the flashpoint. Had nothing to do with the assassination, but the mythology is so tremendous, and people don't realize that the main beneficiary was Great Britain. Great Britain had those two massive behemoths that they could not compete with. Getting them to fight each other was absolute brilliance. And notice the very difference in political systems. Liberal democracy in Britain and very strong monarchies in Germany and Russia. It was the strong monarchies that first created unemployment insurance and fought against child labor and women working all hours of the night. Having some 8-hour days. That all came from strong royal governments. They didn't have to worry about capitalists. Britain was run by capitalists. And of course, capitalism and the free market are two totally different things. But Britain couldn't become the world power that it thought it should be with those two massive countries growing at a ridiculous rate. The only chance they had was to get them to fight each other. And that's where Austria came in.
And Arthur Ponsonby wrote a book. Oh, heavens, I can't remember. He wrote a book about falsehood in wartime, it's called. And he says, for all this talk about the importance of sovereignty and independence that we hear from the Wilson administration, Great Britain's empire expanded 1.3 million square acres after or square miles after the First World War. Where is this independence that we're always hearing about? There's always this fake rationale after the war. You have to lie to get them into the war. You have to scare them. The Lusitania, they're going to come for us. Yeah. And then after the war, it's always, it was actually for Iraqi democracy. That's actually why we went in there. How about the Second World War? What is some must-know information about that?
Well, you see, our 17 truths were all included in what you just said. The fact that works means that most of these 17 things have to be true. A rational, intelligent aristocracy would never buy this garbage. World War II is a different story. Hitler's war machine was relatively small. He exhausted most of his fuel in the Polish campaign. You talked about the British hypocrisy, condemning his invasion of Poland while having a massive empire around the globe, talking about sovereignty. Everyone forgets the Soviets invaded them on the same day. It's okay by them. The whole thing was so transparently absurd. Hitler knew that he didn't have the men or the materiel or the fuel to last more than a few months. He was aware of that. He didn't even have long-range bombers. This is 1941. The British were already bombing Germany by 1941. He didn't have the fuel, the men. He had this public support, but he had very little. Attacking the Soviet Union was a self-sacrificial act, in my opinion. He knew, and everyone else knew, that Stalin was going to invade Europe. The famous four-star general, Peter Grigorenko, who was sent to an insane asylum, was one of the first. He was one of the supreme commanders of the Soviet army in the East. I think he died in 1985 in America. Said he couldn't figure out why there were these massive concentrations of men and fuel and weapons on the border, on the whole western border of the Soviet Union. In other words, so when Hitler invaded, well, he had the fuel he needed, he had the weaponry he needed, and he took millions of prisoners. So Grigorenko was condemning Stalin for allowing that to happen, but of course on the other side, he can't say it, but he's also saying there's a reason why they were there. How come there were no barracks there? How come they had maps with downtown Berlin in it? Stalin knew that if he took Romania, Germany was finished. That if he took, and Hitler didn't have, because they were exchanging, the pact that they had, they were exchanging weapons, they knew exactly what the Germans were capable of. They didn't have a long-range bomber. They didn't have the fuel to fuel them anyway. And there's a chance they were fighting in the West. This is 41. Trying to save Mussolini. Talk about an absurdity. That man. God, if Italy wasn't in the war, Hitler would have done much better. When Mussolini was overthrown, the only person who benefited was Germany. It was Hitler. North Africa, Greece, everyone constantly having to rescue this fool. There was no way to successfully invade the Soviet Union with the men that Hitler had. There was no way to hold it. Getting Moscow had nothing to do with it. You had a huge country with not a whole lot of serviceable roads at the time. He knew that it wasn't going to work. He thought maybe that the Western powers would see the threat that Bolshevism was, but they didn't. As I said before, they were working together for a very long time. And he got chewed up, had to fight a two-front war so that Stalin could build his empire from East Germany to Vladivostok. World War II was fought for the Gulag. And every Korean vet or Vietnam vet should be very upset that World War II was fought, because they fought those wars for that reason. World War II was won by Stalin, who did most of the fighting, and then financed the Chinese Revolution and the Vietnamese. And that's where those two wars came from. Hitler had his first solution to the Jewish problem was sending them to the Middle East, the Havara Agreement. That was his main thing. Unfortunately, Palestine was controlled by Britain, who didn't allow that to happen. Had he won the war, had he defeated Britain, that's what would have happened. It was a very popular thing. The Zionists were working with him to make that happen. It wasn't a popular movement. So the invasion, the main event, the invasion of the Soviet Union, was done without any expectation of victory. They knew that the Soviet army was impressive. Despite what happened in Finland, it was impressive. The Germans knew it backwards and forwards. And hoping maybe the Western powers would see the light, he went in there with few tanks, no heavy tank really, no heavy tank in the Soviet definition of the term. The Soviets outclassed Germany in every single area. Men, tanks, planes. Germany had already lost much of its air force in the West. There was no chance there. Doing some damage to Stalin, maybe pushing him, humbling him a little bit, was the only chance that the West had of being saved. So I do think that about World War II. I think that's the main thing. The U.S. fought on the wrong side, because in fighting Japan, who I don't think did anything wrong, they're building an empire that the British had, and would have done very well for the Asian states. They were the most advanced state.
That's Pat Buchanan's point that on September 1st, 1939, that Germany invades Poland, the area of Danzig, even though it was still 95% German or so, and Britain declares war on September 3rd. And after 60 million deaths, Stalin gets Poland. the war for Polish independence ended with giving Poland to Stalin, with all the deaths, and he also got the other parts, the great capitals of Central Europe, gave us the Korean War and the Vietnam War, not to mention the war in Afghanistan in 1979 that Zbigniew Brzezinski was cheerleading. So, I mean, that's the good war. That's the one they brag about. This should really make us question everything else that we face.
We had 17 points. We started off here. That right there is proof of these 17 points. For that to exist and to be taken seriously, the ridiculousness you just explained, these 17 points have to be true. For people to believe, I can't believe I don't. These are Republican conservative types. They go against me like rat poison. They have no idea. They're saying that we have to get our people in Congress because that's what's going to save us. Said, you just admit you had a stolen election. You just admit that nothing in this system is fair. Yeah, we'll get our people in. We're going to vote them in. How can you talk about elections when you just admitted this one was stolen? You have no ideas whatsoever. And they don't. They'll work with the system. They'll do whatever they can to maintain their respectability. Talking about these people, especially in World War II, is an utter disaster. They still think it's a good war. They still think the American military is a conservative institution. They have no idea. I have paper after paper after paper about the condition of the U.S. military. My Patreon page has a lot of this stuff that no one knows. I have contacts. I come from a military family. I didn't do it myself. My son's in the Marine Corps. My father was a vet in Korea. The whole family. So I grew up with a distaste for officers, but how wildly overpaid they are. The medals, they're covered in medals for wars that they lost. Disastrous training, diversity over everything, very low levels of understanding, and liberal in their politics. And I could go to the Air Force page and see all the diversity days and walk in her shoes and pro-abortion stuff. And they have training stuff there. This is what's going on. Not training them for warfare. And at the same time, you have more than half of half of naval aviation can't fly. They don't have the pilots. They don't have the mechanics. They pay these guys $500,000 a year, and they still can't keep them. There's so many engagements. These tours of duty are so damn long. They're paying them these bonuses are gigantic. They talk about their salaries and, the 05 level or so. They just talk about their salary, not their housing bonus and 10 million other bonuses. They're in the top 1%, these guys, and they still can't keep them. The desertion. I was the first one to talk about the desertion rate over the last 5 years. It is a crisis. When I used to have Facebook, I got kicked off Facebook. Before I had Facebook, I posted these pictures of military. Have you seen these? They're like the Marine who holds the thing in front of his face, saying, I didn't join the Marine Corps. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of these.
To fight alongside Al Qaeda in Syria against Assad. Yeah,
that's a famous one, and I have hundreds, every branch of the service doing this. You have no morale. Training is abysmal. They send these guys. Used to have surface warfare school for the Navy. They're sending these guys off on ship now with a few DVDs. Well, do it on your spare time. They don't know what they're doing. The crisis, the nuclear weapons centers in I think is it Minot, in that North Dakota or South Dakota, the big nuclear base, their incompetence, their ignorance, the drug abuse there. These are the people who are controlling the nuclear weapons. It was a huge crisis. The desertion rates are extremely high. You can't have a family. You can't, you're going from place to place to place. You don't have that many men. The commitments are overwhelming. You have Navy ships smashing into each other all the time, planes falling out of the sky. People have no idea how bad it is. Every week there's a new disaster, especially in the Navy. They're running over, running aground, lack of training. No one takes responsibility. This is a common thing. The Russians and the Chinese don't have to worry about this global empire, are taking notice, as they should. As you know, I'm very pro-Russian, and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization I support. They're the ones who are being threatened, not the U.S. But they realize that a typical Soviet officer, and I know several, a Russian officer, I'm sorry, doesn't take the U.S. military very seriously. That's how we end that topic.
Yeah, and still even though James Baker promised not to expand NATO because there wouldn't be a need if the Soviets withdrew and no longer had the Warsaw Pact, they've still added Hungary and Poland and Slovenia and all these other places since '91, driving Putin into the arms of Xi like a bunch of morons. It's ridiculous. So my last question here, or more or less, is: are there any other lessons we can learn from the Soviet Union, considering 17% of professors in the social sciences identify as Marxist, and 29% of Generation Z thinks that communism is more or less a valid system? What do you have to say to people who need to really understand the importance of why communism and the Soviets are something that must be rejected?
Well, given our 17 points, I'm not so sure we can approach them rationally. I mean, I could give them bullet points as to why it's terrible. But as we found out, I'm not so sure that's going to matter. Information doesn't make any difference. It's what you do with the information that matters. There's information and there's logic. Logic is what you do with the facts. How many times have I debated somebody? We don't even debate this. Discuss someone, give them that. Oh, I didn't know that. Oh, I had no idea that was true. Wow, you're right. And then a day later, I hear him saying the same crap to someone else. The truth doesn't make any difference. What's trendy matters. What their friends are doing, what the chicks want to see. That has far more to do with what they realize that the price of defection is very high. You want to talk like me, you're in serious trouble. Professionally, I raised 2 kids. I owned a home. I've owned 2 homes. I could do it. Not everyone can do it. You're going to lose your job. You're going to lose people. You're going to lose families. If you're not ready to do that, then we can't have it. But to these people, I guess how I would approach them is to say that, well, like I said to the professors, it's not a coincidence that everything that you're saying is financed by every corporate institution in America, by every university, and by every newspaper. You guys are the establishment, while the rebels are a handful of us lunatics, academics or not, on the sidelines, writing and researching, trying to destroy all this with very little money. How can you possibly claim to be, as you said, being in resistance while every single power center supports you? It's great to be able to claim to be a rebel while, being financed by the establishment. That's cognitive dissonance. No, real rebels end up in prison, dead, or on the margins of society. That's where that's where the truth lies.
And what does it mean to be a nationalist?
Philosophically speaking.
Yes. When you say you are a nationalist,
yeah.
What does that mean?
It means that the ethnic collective is the most important political entity. It's how people. It's language. It's how people communicate. It contains everything. It contains their history. It contains their religion. Christians have their religion manifest and enculturated, we say, in their own identity. It's based on the family. It is a natural outgrowth. There's always been ethnic groups. People will die for their kin. And this is extremely important. Where you have races and nations that are homogenous, you have a high level of trust, you have a high level of family stability. I could go article after article after article showing how the minute that breaks down, everything breaks down. Nationalism simply is the ethnic unit mirrors the family. These are extremely important to hold together. Ethnic tradition is, people don't even realize. It's the family that people don't even realize that they're in. The suffering, the stories, this is what holds them together. Now there's nothing holding them together. Ethnicity is always connected with religion. Russians are Orthodox. It's that simple. Ukrainians are Orthodox. All of these things are tightly connected. States that have done very well, in early modernity, were those who were pretty much homogenous, and they had a single religious center. In other words, a single moral core, and a single family, and usually a monarch that manifested it all. They did very well. But when you have multi-ethnicity, you have hucksters trying to play one off against the other. You have everyone trying to get their piece of the pie. You have the need of manipulation. Machiavelli is only needed if you're trying to do something like this. You only need Machiavelli if you really don't have any right to rule in the first place. Justice is based in the political tradition. There's universal rules, but that is all enculturated in the tradition. Nationalism is mostly about the centrality of the ethnic group, not abstract individuals, not because there is no such thing, not the stupid things like the world community, the international community. Yeah, they'll tell you that the regime says that the nation doesn't exist, but the international community does exist.
Yeah.
Talk about mythology. We know the national community exists. This is what holds people together when they're under attack. This is where ethnic groups are formed. Ethnic groups create what I call structures of survival. They're always under attack. Something happens. They hold together. And so much of culture comes from that. It's based on it. The confluence of religion and ethnicity is to the point where you really can't tell the difference. Of course, there's one Orthodox Christianity in the world, but there's Russian Orthodoxy, which is the same dogmatically, but not the same in a lot of other ways. This is what people are willing to die for. This is what holds the family together. So you have the nation with the monarch, the head, on the one hand. You have the family with the father and the head on the other. These are not different things. It's not an analogy. They are parallel institutions, all coming from human nature, because all societies have had this. Any healthy society from the ancient world all had vaguely this kind of structure. You didn't have anything. You didn't have, women controlling marriage. You didn't have media controlling elections. This is only the postmodern West. When the father of the family, which represents the nation, is removed, we know what happens. We know that the children fall to pieces. They become these emo weirdos, engaged in whatever the regime, whatever, especially their media, wants them to engage in. And it is very pathetic. And thank God I was spared of it, and my kids were spared of it.
Thank you to everyone for watching the Libertarian Institute and Keith Knight Don't Tread on Anyone. Dr. Matthew Raphael Johnson, sir, thank you so much for your time.
Keith, I loved every minute of it. Thank you, my friend.